I was trying to find a way to keep my time better when it had become more precious to me. So I went to an older store called Rose's in search of a solution, but none of the cheap agendas or sticky notes really suited my needs. Eventually, I asked a worker there if he knew anything. He said to go to a place behind the old store where I might find what I was looking for. Out back where was a mallway, if you could call it that. It was more like a shack made out of wood and tilting over. There were parts of it where I had to duck my head under stray beams that were holding the place together. Eventually I found the store. It was a windowless thing, so I had to go through a door to get inside. The store was full of old, dusty items, what you might call antiques, immaculately made glassware, and silver with eloquent detail. In the back, though, I found a watch box with Minnie inside. I tried one and put it on, and left the store, feeling much more grounded at the time. Fate and my kids, dementia, innovation, exploration, and hope, were going out to a nearby deli one day called EB's. They left early in the morning and traversed the winding streets of the neighborhood we were in at the time to get to the small little deli. However, unfortunately, after all that walk, it was closed. Fortunately, there was a small convenience store beside it that was open, and they all went in and got various snacks of different varieties. However, they were determined to return to EB's once it opened later that day. So they returned back to the house and went about their own devices. However, Innovation set out to a barn that was behind that house and began putting together various pieces of scrap. By the time they were set to return to the restaurant, she had put together a fully functioning little cart, complete with a motor and other amenities. So they began to return to the restaurant, only in a much more joyous fashion, as the rest surrounded a procession around the little cart. It couldn't go very fast, but they all enjoyed riding on the back of it, taking turns and flying down hills as fast as it could possibly go, without losing its wheels. When they returned to the restaurant at about midday, they were joyous to find that the owners were giving away the rest of their food that would have gone bad over the succeeding Sunday. So they gathered as much as they could carry and settled down in the picnic table in front of the place. Everything was going perfectly until Innovation had a pull to look behind her for one reason or another. Back there, a storm had been forming, and it was nearly about to hit. She alerted the rest and began to leave on her own through a wheat field that connected the parking lot of the restaurant to the neighborhood from which they had came. In the golden grass, the rain hit like a ton of bricks, and Innovation was never happier to have storage and an umbrella.
What's up, Bacon Padres? I hope you all enjoyed this video. It might just seem like a regular weekly upload right after the break, but it's actually been a whole few months for me taking this in a little bit of a different direction away from the kids. I don't know yet. I had a plan laid out, but I don't think I'll follow it. Anyways, I think I'll keep working on these. I thought I might not come back, but I did, and because I was uploading these about a year in advance, a little less than a year now, because I did that, these videos will keep coming out. Did this like right after the last episode, so if it feels a little bit different, that's why. Anyways, God bless y'all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
I was walking around one of Innovation's high school campus when I passed in what used to be an old art building. It was made of bricks, and I noticed that it had a new coat of paint on it since the last time I had seen it. And it was unlocked, which was weird because they didn't use it anymore. Inside was a cold, dark classroom. It was clearly a classroom, although in disrepair. Everything was still in the room, including a couple dated computers in the corner. And lining the walls was old art that curled with time. On the other wall was a door to another room. In the room I was in, there was a single small leak in the middle of the room. But the other room was worse. This room was full of wood and building materials. It was the part I had been in before to do a small project around the school. But the floor was wet and rotting now. I didn't stay there long, going into the next room quickly. This room was basically empty, though the ceiling was littered with leaks and water dripped everywhere. The floor was covered in rotting ceiling tiles with moss growing over them. I went through this smaller room quickly, trying to avoid the drips, catching a few stray ones, until I made it to the next room. This room was a smaller classroom with a massive hole in the ceiling that let in warm golden sunlight. I sat in one of the desks and looked at the chalkboard in the front of the room. Eventually, I started to leave, running through the leaky room again and dodging new leaks in the storage room. Back in the first room, the leak in the middle of the room, was now pouring water. I went over to the old obsolete technology. I had a vague inclination to save some of it, but it was all very bulky and would have been hard to carry out. Though I saw an old iPod perched on a dock, and I decided to save it instead. With that, I left the old art room, where it would have then been torn down, and I would never again return. Exploration stood outside the massive abandoned school complex in foot-tall wheat grass. The behemoth made of concrete loomed over him in the field of gold as cold wind passed him by. He resumed his journey to the building. The heavy metal doors resisted his entry, although they were not locked, just frozen with time. The inside was exactly how he remembered it. The tall, tiled halls with metal staircases to the science wing led left, but he decided to go right. The school was dark and quiet. It felt alien, though he remembered every detail. The common area was pitch black, so he followed the wall around it and took another hall, one of the more standard ones in the school, and then another. This hall was brighter and led down to a massive cafeteria. He took a moment to look at the elegant floor-to-ceiling windows, letting in golden light, and pay special attention to each of the empty restaurants around him. He started to walk towards the school's vending area, but was stopped by a soft voice from behind. He turned around to see a young girl who wore a white dress. She was partially transparent, and he asked her what she had said. She repeated what she had said. It was about the old secrets of the school, old tales, but they left his mind the second that he heard them. At one point, exploration was back in the science wing, where he remembered. And he did remember saying, "And that was all you," after she was done. She said yes and faded away as the memory of her fled from his mind. He tried to hold on to it and managed to regain the first and last parts of their interactions. The school felt big then, with exploration all alone. The air was stale and the place was completely silent. Exploration didn't look at his school much as he left. He simply found the nearest exit from memory and left the old place, for the final time, never to return. As fishing season approached, Rot Present and I joined a fishing team with the church. Most days we all went out to a big lake and park nearby, before migrating to a smaller creek and then another lake before going home. And since it was the summer, we all had time to do this, for about a week. And so we did it without incident for the first few days, catching many fish in the lakes and the creeks. On this particular day, late in the week, I had caught a walleye, and others in the group had caught several other fish. I took from my pipe as the day was turning out to be a particularly pleasant fishing day. At some point, I looked over to Present for one reason or another, but it was behind him that I saw something concerning. Massive storm clouds bearing huge streaks of lightning, lighting them up in a horrible gruesome red, bore down on us, coming in fast from the west. I took one last time, savoring the moment before everything went wild, before I alerted the group to the oncoming storm. When I had alerted, everyone was in all a rush to get everything packed up and stowed away in their cars. Some had even driven off by the time I had gotten my small tackle box into my car, but I had driven there with Present and I went back to help him with his. Present, for some reason, had packed the entire house. Grandiose as ever he was, but getting it packed up was another thing entirely. It was like packing away a mechanic's entire tool set. He even had a giant toolbox that he had taken with him, with tackle gear inside. I grabbed a couple bags and helped him get some odd things into the big tackle box, and we shoved towards my car. At the exact moment the storm hit. The wind had picked up ever more since I had mentioned that the storm was coming, and the thunder from the lightning had been present since then as well. But then the wind was tornado level and the thunder was ever present, booming around us, and we were pelted with fierce precipitation. But it wasn't rain, it was snow. We were in a massive blizzard, and it quickly piled up around our feet. It was hard to move forward, and with the stuff it was nearly impossible. I hadn't realized that I could barely see anything until Present called out over the force of the storm, asking where my car had been. I clicked the lights, and it lit up through the snow like a beacon, and we quickly got inside. We slid and struggled through the snow as we made it back to the motel we were staying in. But we did make it back, as we turned on the TV to figure out what was going on. Of course, they didn't know, and while the storm might fade, it would forever remain an enigma. Hope was going on a school field trip and stopped at a Walmart and hotel along the way. The Walmart was massive, and the hotel surrounding to it and attached to it made the store appear even larger. When he got there, he put his stuff in his room and went into the store to get some snacks and other things. He had acquired and paid for spicy Cheetos and a couple trinkets as well, when all the lights in the store were turned off and an intercom pinged, telling everyone that the store was closed in a polite and professional voice. Hope felt that there was something off about the situation, but his peers didn't seem to think so, as they started to throw a party in the middle of the store. They all got out flashlights and music and danced like wild people. Hope stayed alert through the festivities and began to notice a growing trend of lights on the edge of the group going out. This gave him an even worse feeling. It filled his soul with dread. But instead of running away immediately, he went over to see what was going on. He saw a flashlight dim being swallowed up by the group. No one else seemed to notice the silent retreat of the light down into the aisles, so he ran after it instinctually. Eventually, he found a younger pair of his curled up in the aisles, pointing the flashlight in every direction. He got him up, and they both went back to the hotel. He dropped him off at his room before returning to his own. He went to sleep, hoping that everything would be more clear in the morning. But when he woke up, the intercom came on again, and it was clear that this was just the first wave. The lights came back on, but the doors were still locked. The lines had been drawn and the game had been set, and it became ever more clear that nobody would win. Future Rot and I went to a mall one day. It wasn't East Town Mall or Mountain Town Mall, rather a smaller mall with nothing much else around it. We went to a burger place beforehand, before entering the mall and wandering around for a little bit. However, when we saw an open door to the back rooms, we all got excited for some adventure and went inside. The back rooms were fairly standard as well, until we found another door leading down. We found ourselves in a dark underground tunnel. There was only occasional lights that were dim or flickering, but the darkness and the underground back rooms drowned them out. I felt the smooth, papery drywall walls as we continued, but in a particularly dark section they turned to stone. I didn't tell anyone, but withdrew my hand, and by the time we crossed another light, it was drywall again. Past that light was another staircase going up to a door that clearly had daylight shining through. We went up and found a tiny office building. It had a lobby like an area with 2 offices in the back. It also had an upstairs that was comprised of 2 more offices. The place was almost entirely empty, the only thing occupying it being the warm sunlight flooding in through the big windows in the front of the building. Adventure was still on our minds, so we returned to the downstairs passage below. Eventually, we came across another staircase, only this time the light of day did not reside inside. We climbed it to find another hallway, like that of a school. When we found the sanctuary, we knew that it was a church. Everything was inside the church, unlike the office, so we had fun exploring it. When we had thoroughly gone through the base level, we ascended the steep stairs to the 2nd level, hoping to find a bell tower. But in the small waiting area at the top of the stairs, we triggered a motion detector, and an alarm immediately began to blare. We dashed down the stairs, back to the tunnels, and made the distance to the mall in no time at all. But we didn't relax until we had driven away, returning to the burger place where the adventure started, where we then felt free to laugh about the whole thing. Overall, it was a fun trip to the mall, although certainly not expected. My friends and I were on a trip to Clear Creek in Mountain Town. At some point during the trip, I grabbed my fishing poles and left the group. I crossed a suspension bridge down the creek before walking to find a pleasanter spot. The fish bit well and I enjoyed my time. When night was drawing near, I decided to head back, so I packed my supplies into my backpack and leisurely walked back. It wasn't long until I found the trail that snaked through the woods, but it was just about dark by the time I found the suspension bridge again. There was already someone on the bridge, a silhouette leaning over the left rope, about halfway down. I looked around, but told myself I was being irrational. It was just one person, and the bridge was the only way back. I crossed it, gleamed in the evening sun. When I was about halfway across, I looked back towards the guy. Up close, I could see he was clearly homeless, but more concerning, I could make out that he was cutting the rope to the bridge. It was already frayed, and I ran forward, shouting no. But the last strand broke, not before I passed the guy, but too soon to leap towards the shore. I grabbed onto a plank and fell with the bridge. The cold water dipped in my back, and I yelled at the man. I didn't stay there for long, slowly ascending the fallen bridge. Once I was at the top, I thought to leave the homeless guy, and I made a step towards the camp. But I stopped. That guy almost killed me, but he was old and crazy, so I turned back to help, just in time to see him standing up at the ledge. I told him that I was going to help him, and he said that he knew. I reminded him how stupid he was while I got out my towel to give to him, due to him being completely soaked. We talked more, nicely, while I found him a spot to sleep for the night. After I had, it was dark and cold, so I started a fire, where I listened to his stories until he fell asleep. I put more wood on it and left by the time I got back to the camp. Dawn was showing and the first signs of its appearance, so I decided to run into town for breakfast. I built up speed on the old country roads. When the sunrise shone in, I unfurled my wings and flew. I caught up to and waved at a newer convertible as I flew past. I watched it as I passed, but I focused my eyes back on the road once it was long behind me. In the morning sun, I could see the town appearing before me, and so I flew over a line of traffic and down the main street. I saw a 2-story dark wood Chinese place that was about to open, so I decided to wait in the line forming around its door to enter. I did, and they had breakfast there, surprisingly, and it was good. It was day before I returned to camp. Flying in, it's like I had flown out. Rutt and Present were there around a different fire, drinking their morning coffee, and they said that they wanted to go fishing. That's when I realized that all my gear had been lost to the bridge, but they said that they had found it on the outskirts of the camp. And so that day we all went again, although we had a bit more trouble crossing the creek that the suspension bridge used to go over. Easttown Mall had opened again in full force. Everything was back open and restored to its original glory. The place was elegant and filled with people. All the stores were open and packed, and I wandered through. I went to an old store that I had once loved as a child. This one was a spin-off of a country restaurant, and it was beautiful inside. It was golden and full of light and life. As a kid, I loved looking at their toy section, and I glanced over it now through the eyes of myself as a child. They had other things too, like antique electronics stores that I looked at, as well as new electronic stores with the latest and greatest in technology. They had an arcade full of new equipment that I looked in. It was great. All the things were big, and they even had a couple small rides. They had a smaller retro arcade in the lower levels that I looked through. It was interesting to see all the old equipment there, and it was slightly less populated than the rest of the mall. However, they both made me yearn for my passion, the Infinite Arcade. So I headed towards the part of the mall where my old theater was. The mall, as it was then, had two sides, a restored side, living in glory, filled with people, and a slightly less populated side, low-hanging ceilings, cheap stores, and was in a tiny bit of disarray. This side was where the old theater was, far away from the new theater that I had gone to before. I looked inside and found couple old arcade machines. They were turned off in a corner as they had been in the new theater, but I followed them, and behind them there was the door to the Infinite Arcade. Down the first set of stairs, narrow and dark, I found the first big room. It was full of electronic equipment. I played skis balls and claw machines, not winning much and not really caring, as there was no one at the prize table. Even on this first floor, some of the arcades were in disrepair. There was dust on everything, and it was clear that I was the only one that had been there for a while. But down I still persisted. There was a small steps in the middle of the room that led down to a lower level that was about the same as the first. But if you looked around there, you would find another staircase leading under both of them that led deeper into the arcade. This room was full of completely abandoned and disrepaired equipment, and under that, another floor that was much the same. I went down again, the floor getting darker, but I had regretted never seeing how far the arcade went. So I went down again. This floor was completely dark. The arcade machines in there stood out like aliens, their odd shapes casting funny shadows in the dark. And I felt very uncomfortable and didn't stay long. In a panic, I almost didn't find the staircase, but the slight amount of light that it emitted was like a beacon in the dark room. I left the lower levels of the arcade quick, and even in the first level, I didn't feel entirely easy, wondering what was below lurking in the dark. Dementia was trying to get into her college dorm room one day, but she found this day, as most days, that the lock wasn't turning. It was always finicky, but it was closer to her where she usually was. The lock on the other side of the dorm was slightly more reliable, so she decided to just walk around, when she noticed a door in the middle of the building that she hadn't before. There was a fair-sized hallway, neat and clean and not special, until she made it to a bustling room. It was full of people, big and tall, and had an abundance of escalators for some bizarre reason. It looked like the inside of a mall, and that's when she discovered that the outside of the dorms where she lived was only the shell of the building, with the real action going on in this inside segment. Still, she only wanted to go to her room, so she got in one of the mini escalators up. It was faster than she expected, rocketing her up to the 3rd floor. She looked around the escalator to the 4th floor, but couldn't find one that went directly there. Instead, she had to go down and look around again. She thought she might have better luck on the 2nd floor. There were a couple escalators down there, so she just picked one randomly, but it didn't end up where she thought it would, going into a children's library on the 3rd floor again. The 3rd floor had a section in it that was a little like a children's school, so she started looking around that area for a while. When she saw Future, she decided to go to him and ask him how to get to the 4th floor. He didn't know, but took him to his chaperone, who was about her age, and she took her out to the main mall and up a slow escalator to the 4th floor. The 4th floor was nearly empty, a run-down restaurant with a low-hanging ceiling. Future's chaperone took her to one of the few workers there, who gave them permission to go through the back rooms of the place. She took her into the cramped building back rooms, bathed with yellow lights. Then she wondered why she knew this route. They walked down some stairs into a bigger room, then into that room's closets, to her trash chute room, then finally from there to her own hallway, and back to her One summer day, under the warm sun, Fade and I met in the outdoor garden. I flew there first, looking down for a pleasant spot. I saw a clearing with a couple of ponds. She showed up not long after. and we looked into the biggest pond, which was in the middle of the other two ponds, as they all flowed into each other. That one had fish inside, bearing shining silver and purple. There was even a jellyfish that floated lazily inside. Fade knew the names of a few, and she talked about them and some other things. My good friend Rot came passing through at some point, so we all began to walk home together. One day I drove out on long and twisted back roads, past rolling fields of golden wheat and lush forests, out to the middle of nowhere. At one point I rounded a sharp turn, and up above me on a cleared green hill was a little business. I pulled into the tiny gravel lot of the shabby store and ventured inside the glass doors. The store turned out to be an aquarium, so I went to the nearest tank to look inside. The first tank was modeled after a pond, big and colorful goldfish and massive catfish. Next to it were more normal tanks. They were all full of your typical colorful tropical fish, but towards the end of my looking through the store, I found a large tank with a massive octopus in it, and a couple smaller octopi around it. It was a mysterious and strange store, but interesting in a good way. But more than anything, I was glad I stopped by. The House of Time was always a mysterious place. Even in the day, one could get lost in the sprawling halls full of forgotten secrets. But it was always welcoming and warm, like the shower exploration was taking that night. It was a pleasant but normal shower. He dried off normally and got dressed, then stepped out barefoot into the huge dark hallway. He walked towards his room by memory, but ended up in a place he didn't expect. It was a huge, strange, and dark room. There was warm light coming from the other side of the room, so he drew towards it and entered a small hallway with 3 sharp bends. Past the last bend, the hall opened up into a huge room full of golden light and life. This room was full of shelves that stretched up to the ceiling, bearing shining glassware, antiques eloquently crafted in forgotten methods of times past. The life in the room were strange, small creatures that waddled around in full-body suits, busily rushing about, toiling spiritfully at whatever they were doing. He went on further to another room like the first, that connected via the side opposite to the entrance of the first room. This room was similar to the first, full of noble metals like silver and gold, boasting of forgotten eloquence. This room seemed a little darker than the first, and there were less of the little workers around. He moved on to the next room. This room was darker, devoid of life. This room bore woodcrafts in a slightly less organized fashion, though they were still eloquent displays of woodwork. There were rocking chairs, boats, and wooden statues of Indians and horses. I always thought that the way artists depict horses in the statues gave them a sort of strained and painful, almost mournful expression. But I moved on. The other rooms, though full of more life, were relatively quiet, and of course that one was silence. So, exploration heard someone coming easily, and ducked behind the wall separating the room. It was past, though she looked strange then. Something was different about her, so he ducked further back, hiding in a small wooden merry-go-round. Past was mad, yelling at the workers in a strange voice. He looked at the different artifacts that were around him, as he couldn't really hear what she was saying anyways. He was looking at the strange, painful expression of the wooden horse statue above him, when one of the workers entered that room and approached him. It told him in a soothing yet strange and artificial almost voice that it was time to go. He suddenly was aware that Past was gone, so he left the room and the strange and wonderful warehouse with haste. Back in the dark, he wandered around until he found his room and his cool, comforting bed. He woke only a few hours later to a new light, warm and welcoming, coming from downstairs, as well as the sounds of friendly life. So he creeped down the stairs into a long hallway. On the first floor, most of the dark hardwood doors were closed as they usually were, concealing their secrets inside. But one was open. Sounds of polite chatter emanated, so he drew near and looked inside to see a gathering of the Times and his own family. They were all looking at something against the floor and wall. He joined their group to see a small hole with light inside. He decided to go in, and Innovation handed him a camera to record himself inside. With that, he entered the hole. Inside was a dimly lit brick service tunnel. He continued down the tunnel to a lip in the wall. As he got close, he began to see. The lip was a design in the bricks around a hole in the wall. As he got closer still, he saw something inside, so walked in between the indents in the wall and saw that inside was massive statues of inhuman characters. So, unsettled, he continued on. There was another set of statues and then another, but eventually he came across a set that were slowly moving their hands, stretching out slowly, barely noticeable. But he noticed and ran on, but there was no comfort in the next statues. They spasmed in place in unnatural ways with impossible speed. So he ran on ever faster. The next statue cut out was empty, the most fearful of them all. So he ran at full speed until he reached a bend in the tunnel, where he slowed and pointed the camera back at his face. But behind him there was another statue, huge and purple. It looked up slowly and began to take a step as he started to run. Then it ran and caught up to him in a shattered fraction of a second and touched his shoulder when the entire world went black. That morning, Exploration woke up in his bed as normal, but beside him on the table, as he was getting ready, he noticed Innovation's camera and gave it back to her without a word. No one spoke of that night, but he remembered. One day, while driving through the back roads of the hills of Tennessee, I came across a tiny strip mall that would have overlooked the town I was in at the time, called Mountain Town, if there wasn't thick foliage surrounding it. Most of the stores were closed, though there was a small deli open, so I pulled on to its cracked and uneven parking lot. Walking up to the deli, I could tell that something was bizarre about the strip mall. It was far too thin and looked as though it had served another purpose before its current. While looking out on its structure, I noticed the far right side of the bottom building was beginning to fall in on itself. I went in the deli and I ordered a small sandwich. I talked to the person who ran the deli. He said the building was made as the entrance to a massive, grand Mountain Town theme park. He spoke of a better time when Mountain Town thrived around the park, but it was clear that it was fading without it. He handed me my sandwich, freshly made and warm, and added that you could still see the outline of the once grand theme park rising above the trees, especially when they lost their leaves in the winter. I thanked him and left, though it was cold when I went outside. The wind swept over the mountainside and over me, and I looked up slowly to see winter had come all around me. I remembered the old deli man's words and looked towards the woods. I saw it there, a massive shadow looming above the trees. There was a massive winding roller coaster and Ferris wheel among some other smaller structures of the great park visible. I stared at them for a long moment and then turned back to the deli, but jumped when I saw it. The deli was closed, a shell of its former self. The only evidence that it had been there at all was the faded spot where the sign had once been, and the sandwich, still warm in my hand. I ate it in my car while idling the engine for heat, savoring the taste and the sight of the park's shadow for a long time, before they were both gone. When night fell, I returned to the road, still savoring the last of my pepperoncini pepper as I left the place to time. A big group of kids and adults and some of my friends from the church were all going down to Dementia's college to have a massive Nerf battle. We met in the parking lots and then dispersed in the early afternoon as clouds covered the sky and the sun began to draw low, making it quite dark outside. The wind began to pick up then, and as I ran through the parking lot, the streetlights began to shake in their foundations. There was an elementary school on campus that I went to, which had shorter poles but big, colorful lights on top. They shook wildly while I prepared for the impending battle. When Dementia came running through, I poked around at the elementary school and sniped her. She ran towards me and I shot her twice more, but she had something important to say, so I only shot her in the head once more before I heard her out. It turned out that the Nerf war had been called off for the weather, and we were all meeting at a diner nearby, so I walked to the small wooden diner as rain began to fall. Lightly at first, but as I entered the door, a heavy downpour began. The place was full of people from the church, and I didn't recognize any faces around me. So I got a burger, fries, and even a milkshake to dip it in. And I found a small place on the wall where I could eat, as the storm began to rage on outside.
Hey guys, summer's over, and what a summer it has been. I hope you've enjoyed this season of Dustfall. It was super fun to work on. Took me the whole summer, lots of cool videos. I think this is the best season ever. I hope I can continue from here, but things might change up again as school gets started. But a lot of really good, memorable episodes. A lot of them that I've really been wanting to get to. I've been super excited about the old school exploration in the old school. Grandma's house, of course. The bridge was a great one. But yeah, it's been super wild. Since this is going out next summer, I wonder if this summer will be remembered for how crazy it was. There seemed to be a next huge thing in the news every week. And how could I almost forget that my book came out? I don't know when I'll announce it on this channel, but that was super big. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this season of Dustfall. I might have a couple more videos, but for now, I'll see you in the fall, probably October. Goodbye.